Sara Porkalob, thank you so much for joining us. We're honored to have you because you're
Yes.
kicking ass these days up on stage and
But you
performing.
have been for a long time. So.
Right.
I have been. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me, Enrique and Matt. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, hey, so, how do you feel about all this? Because your performances have really drawn such great reviews. And it's really built on your family, your history. That to me is just incredible.
Thank you so much. To be honest, I feel fucking great about it. I started 10 years ago, my senior year at Cornish College of the Arts. I made a decision that year regarding the type of artist I wanted to be, the type of impact I wanted to have in my community, and the kinds of people that I wanted to reflect, honor, empower, and lift up, not only in my plays on stage, but ideally in everything that I do. So 10 years later, now it really feels like all of the hard work that I put in, all of the relationships that I've made and maintained, all of the connections and shows that I've had, it just feels like everything's culminating in a really fantastic way. And I'm starting this new chapter. And even while I'm moving to NYC and I'm about to take over Broadway, Broadway was never really the goal. The goal was to make my platform national, then international, and see where I could go. So this is really just the next chapter of my life, and it feels great.
Well, now this chapter was delayed a little bit, right? Because this supposedly happened before COVID.
Exactly. I was literally about to get on a plane to go start rehearsals for this Broadway revival that I'll be in 1776. 2 weeks before my flight, our city shut down.
Yeah.
Right.
So have you always wanted to be a performer? I mean, your trajectory is I mean, it's incredible, but it's like, were you doing this as a kid? I mean, so how did you get here? Because, most good Asians, right? It's like, be a pharmacist, right?
Or if you're Filipino, be a nurse,
So what I will say is, I've wanted to do this ever since I was a little girl. I'm the first of my generation, and my mother is the oldest of her generation. So when I was born, my mother was still living at home with her mother and all of her siblings. And she had me quite young. She was 19, so her brothers and sisters were all younger. And what that meant for me as the baby of the family is that I was often the center of attention. And because I was like the first grandbaby, my grandmother, who was also an incredible singer and would have been an amazing performer had it not been for some unfortunate circumstances in her life and her immigration story, looking back, it makes a lot of sense that I am where I am today. And regarding, what you said about being a good Asian, you either got to be a pharmacist or a nurse. I can recall 2 times in my 32 years of life that my family ever tried to dissuade me from becoming an artist.
Awesome.
One time actually was my senior year of high school, where I was applying for like FAFSA and college applications. And my mother's looking over at my shoulder. She's watching me fill out the applications online. And she goes, maybe you could be a pharmacist. And I was like, Mommy, why? And she was like, because the benefits are great. You could travel and get work anywhere. And eventually you could make your own schedule and do art on your own time. And I looked at her and I was like, Mommy, I'm not going to be a pharmacist, because one day I'm going to play a doctor in a famous heroes movie. And she's like, oh, good point. So to answer your question, I've always seen myself as a performer, and I come from a Filipino family that is full of performers. And to be the first person to make a career out of this really feels like the culmination of my family's hopes and dreams as artistic creatives.
Wow. You seem to have this super confidence. Where did that come from?
My family. And also, in this economy, I can't afford to not be confident.
Yeah, that's for sure.
True.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the fact is too, I mean, I'm sure, as you guys know, right? And as so many of your audience knows, as a person of color and as somebody who grew up in poorer communities, right? And my mother, she's queer. So I grew up in a really diverse family. And in the face of white supremacy, people like us are silenced every day.
Yes.
We're diluted down to stereotypes. We are held up as model minorities to pit ourselves against other people of color. And I was really lucky to be raised in a household where my parents made me very aware of that narrative from a very early age. And they were like, you know what, Sarah, you can actually do anything you want to do. You can be whoever you want to be. And the obstacles that are ahead of you, we're going to tell you what those are now. So you're not like 30 years old being like, wait a minute, why have I been afraid to take up space and speak my truth? So yeah. And it's also, from a performance perspective, I, in my early 20s, had to perform confidence, even if I didn't feel confidence.
Mm-hmm.
It was like putting on a character or a costume. And I knew I had to do that in order to know what it really felt like to walk in my true confidence.
What's funny? It's most people of color just do that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know of any person of color who doesn't do that. But you've taken it to an art form and made a career out of it.
Exactly.
So you talk about your family being performers. It must have been a riot, right? I mean, people would perform and sing and just, for each other's amusement and community's amusement. What was that like?
It meant that the house was always loud. One of my uncles is a DJ now, and I remember he would have crates and crates of records in the garage, and all the neighborhood kids would come while he would like mix songs on his turntables, and they would throw it on cardboard, and they would be like breakdancing in the garage, and I'm like 4 being like, wow, and my other uncle, not a DJ, but he was like into alternative rock, so he would pull out his guitar and just riff. And then my 2 aunties, incredible singers, they were always practicing Mariah Carey songs. And my grandma, she would just pull out the karaoke machine after every shift at work. She want to come home and relax to some Dolly Parton and Elvis Presley and all that.
She plays guitar. She plays guitar too.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
Bremerton, Washington, Kitsap
Right.
County. Mm-hmm.
Were you born in the Bremerton area, or?
I was born at Bremerton Naval Hospital, and we lived there until I was 4. Then me and my mom moved to Alaska, and then we moved back to Bremerton when I was 9 in 1998. And I've been in and around the Seattle area since then.
You went to Cornish and liberal arts school. How was that for you, particularly as a Filipina, person of color, woman of color? And how did that also affect what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it had the plus sides. Like, I've made some friends who I still stay in contact with. And it was largely traumatic day to day.
Really?
Yeah, it was. Here's how I'd like to chart it out for people. My freshman year, I got there straight out of high school, right? I got there with almost a full ride. I was like, I'm so lucky to be here with other theater kids. Woohoo! Gonna sing musical theater in the hallway and be annoying. Okay. Second year, sophomore year comes around, and I'm like, man, suddenly things have gotten harder. And then I was hit with a bill for tuition that I wasn't able to pay. So I had to take a year off after my first semester. That year off was probably the most depressing year I've had in my life, because it really felt like I was letting down my family, even though nobody ever said so. They knew that I was going to go back to school. But for me, being like 19 and fragile, I was like, oh my God, I've totally let down my family. I never want to do theater. I can't even face my friends. Everybody's having a good time without me. But it was in that year that I grew up a lot. And I realized that I had the opportunity to go back to school and reassess what I really wanted my education to be. And I was like, you know what, Sarah? It's time to be serious. It's time to get serious. So then I went back to school. And my junior year, I had a couple of amazing classes that really gave me the vocabulary regarding social justice and race theory. And I was finally able to have the words to describe not only the microaggressions that I had been faced with, and so many of my other POC peers have been faced with at school. I was able to start to see the world in a different light. So then by that point, I was like the angry brown girl, right? Like all of us brown girls, there's like 4 of us at school. We were like, we're so angry. And then senior year hit, and I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm paying so much money to go here. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And then, I was met with a lot of resistance from my faculty and the head of my department, but they couldn't stop me. Like, what could they do? What could they do?
Yeah.
Kick me out. Psh, no, they get money because of people like me who go to that school. So my senior year, I was like, yep, I'm just gonna do exactly what I want because I'm not here to waste anybody's time, and I'm definitely not here to waste my time. So I would say that going to Cornish was one of the like best and worst things that has happened in my life. It quickly changed from a theater nerd's utopia into a stark reality of white supremacy, institutional white supremacy. But it was also the fodder and the fire that I needed to transform into the version of the artist that I feel like I've really embodied today, 10 years later.
Was the resistance to what you wanted to say, write, perform? Is that where the resistance came from the faculty?
Yeah, you know, I wanted to do a lot of things. For example, your senior year, you have a senior thesis, and you could have yours, you could be in a couple of other people's, but really the faculty was like, you probably shouldn't be involved in more than like 2 or 3 senior thesis projects. And I was involved in 6.
Wow.
A lot of people wanted to work with me as a director, wanted me as an actor in their piece, and I wanted to work with every single one of them. So I think my faculty, they were really like, that's way too much for you to do. And I was like, you don't know me, I'm gonna do it. And then, you know, I wasn't ever considered like a comedic actor in college, which is really fucking hilarious because I'm really hilarious. so, so it, I had to sign up for a class, a solo performance class my senior year to really explore the narratives and the characters and the stories that live within me that I wanted to tell, because up until that point, I hadn't read a single play that looked anything like my family, except for like traumatic immigration stories. Mm. Or stories about Asian people struggling directly against white people. And I was like, you know what? That's not all we do, you guys.
Yeah, that's true, though. That is true. A lot of it is the Trail of Tears kind of stories. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I mean, Asian families have a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe not some don't, but most of them do, right?
Yeah.
Filipino families sure do, because you know, I grew up in the Yakima Valley where you know, there was a little community area called Little Manila, and areas, you know, my best friends, they were Filipino and Mexican and Native and all of that, and they were the funnest guys and the party guys, and but also could be serious, but they were entertaining. You wanted to have a good time, you hung out with them. So yeah. So how did, as you were progressing along here, the dragon cycle, the development of all that? I mean, you had it already, but how did that start so that you get to the point where you're going to be able to actually perform it?
Totally. So at Cornish, I was like, all these stories and these methods of storytelling that I'm being taught, that I am being coached and trained and being told that are like the best way to tell stories, the best kinds of stories to tell. As I mentioned before, it didn't look anything like me. And it felt like the tools that I was being given didn't really like fit my hands. They didn't really fit my body. So I was like, you know what? I know I'm not a bad storyteller. I know I'm not. So maybe it's not me. Maybe it's the curriculum. Maybe it's the methods of storytelling. Maybe it's the kinds of stories. So then I was like, okay, if that's the case, here's an obvious way to begin my process. What types of stories do I have to offer the world? And I was like, man, I should probably just start with my family, right? Like that made a lot of sense. The stories that I have up until that point, right, you know, early 20s, were largely shaped by my community and my familial experience. So I was like, okay, perfect. Maybe go as far back as you can. Who is that in your family? Your grandma. Awesome. And then when I was like, wait a minute, actually, I know a lot of stories about my grandma. And there's a lot of mystery about my grandmother's life before she immigrated. Maybe I should explore that. And you know, a lot of people ask me, they're like, how did you even start? Did you even interview your family? Like, did you have to ask them where you met with resistance? And the fact is, we be Filipino as hell. My family loves to talk about the past, bro. We get together and before you know it, we're cracking up or we're arguing about a story that happened in the past. So the stories that I initially used to start creating the first couple drafts of what would be Dragon Lady were stories that I had grown up hearing. And then I started to ask myself, you know what, Sarah? what do you think you know about your family? What don't you know about your family? And what is there to learn about your family? And asking those initial questions, I know had a huge impact on my process, because all of a sudden I was able to like hold space for my family's stories in a way that wasn't coming from a place of judgment or coming from a place of like, ooh, looking for the most entertaining bits. I really was just practicing how to be open to the people who had made me who I am today and their unique story. And over the course of many years, I realized that I wasn't writing only one play about my grandma. I was writing a play about my mom. I was writing a play about my aunties and my uncles and my other mother, Tina. And I was like, oh shit, this is awesome. I could probably do this for the rest of my life. And then after that, it just became about doing it, you guys, just about practicing. I had to let go of the idea that I had to make the perfect play before I could put it in front of people, because the reality is theater is a live art form.
Yes.
It works best when it has an audience, and that audience can literally be one person. I've had shows where I've had like 4 people in the audiences, and those shows were just as amazing as the sold out runs that I've had too. So it became about, to distill it down, the answer to your question, 1, asking myself important questions, being curious and being humble in the face of my story and the stories of my family. Then it became about practicing in my process, editing, performing, doing it again, making edits, taking risks, making big choices, learning from my audience reactions. Then that grew and created a cycle of growth that led me to the discovery that I'm writing more plays and I could do this for the rest of my life.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it's so funny because white people don't get the stories, right? Because nothing really happens to white people. I mean, kind of figuratively, but I've always found that the worst things that happen to you as a person of color also make the best stories.
I think that it's important, to dive into them rather than to like be afraid of sharing them or being ashamed of sharing them.
Because what you realize once you start telling them, they're pretty funny, actually, once you have perspective.
Yeah. And it also is exciting too to see how my audiences have diversified over the years, and to have, yes, white folks come in and be like, you know what, I'm not Filipino, and I understand that your story is very specific, but it really moved me because your relationship with your mother and your mother's relationship with her grandmother, the resentment and the mystery and the unsolved problems of these generations, I really feel that. And that's something that I never anticipated, I thought for a long time that my story was only going to reach Filipinos, but after doing it for 10 plus years in many different versions, everybody in my audience finds something to connect to.
Those are universal themes, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's also something else about immigrant stories and people of color and the things that you have to deal with in American society and a white American society, that it's adversity, there's humor, there's up, there's down. It's all over the place, and they make for really good stories. They make for great stories. So.
Life without privilege.
That's what it is. Well, and then to realize that it's like in your case, your grandmother and your mother, and then all the other family members. So tell us about your grandmother. She seems to be quite a character.
Well, yeah, y'all, she'd be crazy. So she's definitely the matriarch of the family, and she's getting older. But all my life, she's always been, in my eyes, like glamorous, fearless, no nonsense, won't take shit from anybody. I remember one time being at the bingo hall in Bremerton because she was supposed to babysit me, but she had to work, right? And I was sitting in the non-smoking section because, back then when we had those. And I remember like playing with the daubers on paper, just like, watching my grandma, and all of the old people were like being so nice to me because, I was like little girl. And I remember my grandmother, all of a sudden, I hear like shrieks, and she has had this grown ass man, like a foot taller than her, on the floor. She's twisted his arm and she's standing on his neck with one of her heels because he was sexually harassing her. And he like
Oh.
grabbed her butt as she walked by, and she had it. And she was screaming in Tagalog, and she was like, "How dare you touch me? I'm gonna fucking kill you."
Wow.
And that's one of my first memories of my grandma. And, you know, I also have the memories of her holding me at night and singing me lullabies because my mom was working all the time. So she's a complex woman. And I know that I get a lot of my passion and my talent from her. And if she hadn't have had to become a mother of 5 kids, like if she was able to walk in the privilege that I have in my generation, she would be a star. So it just feels really cool in Dragon Lady to be able to give her life and her story the star quality that it deserves.
Now she's part of the performance, right?
Yeah, so she usually is, but for this production, because we opened back in January when like the wave of Omicron was just like a little bit higher for our comfort. And we decided that with her older age, and though she is vaxxed and boosted, that it would be safer to not have her be a part of this production. And she's really sad and mad about it, you guys. She texts me all the time during the shows, and she's like, "Are they laughing? Do they like it?" But otherwise, yes, she is a part of the production.
So how did, as you're telling the stories, how did she take it? Maybe the first time she saw it, or your mom, or your aunties, or the others.
Okay, so it was in 2015 when I had the very first 1-act version of Dragon Lady, so about a 45-minute long show. It's in a very small theater. Maybe only 40 people can sit there, and they're very close to you. Like I could see them. They're like right there. And she calls me. She goes, "Sarah." I go, "Yeah, Grandma." She goes, "I'm coming to your show that you have written about me. Your mother got us tickets on the brownpeopletickets.com. I said, "Brown paper ticket?" She goes, "No, brown people." And I was like, "Okay, cool. I'll see you tomorrow." So she comes to the show. She's dressed up and everything, matching accessories. Her, my mom, my 2 aunties, they're sitting there together. And as I'm telling the story, 10 minutes into the play, I hear her lean over to my mother and go, "Oh my God, why is she telling everybody my secrets?" And then 10 minutes later, I hear her say, "It did not happen that way." And then 2 minutes later, "Oh my God, it did happen that way. How did she know?" So then by the end of the night, she's crying, my mom's crying, my aunties are crying, and everybody's crying and laughing. And they come up to me and they were amazed. My auntie Lily, she was like, "Our life was hard." And I was like, "Yeah, we were poor. Life was fucking hard." And she goes, "I never thought that our stories would move people like this. I didn't know that it was so funny." And she was like, "How did you know? Like, you weren't even there for, like, you weren't even born yet for a lot of that." And I looked at her and I got emotional. And I was like, "I know, because yeah, that's my story too. And I grew up listening to you guys." So ever since then, they have been unanimously supportive and incredible about my journey and our journey as a family and having our story on stage.
I always think it's important that for every family, well, and particularly for people of color with their family, if they're immigrant or whatever, is to sit down with your parents if you can, and before they pass, and get the stories, have them open up about what happened, and either write it down or somehow video it and record the audio, because those are treasures to have, I think. So
That's what
yeah.
I think too. I
Yeah.
know it to be true. And it's hard for every family though, right? Because
Right. Yeah.
just different generational stuff.
Yes, yes.
It is. Yeah.
So you do directing too, because a friend of mine, Susan Liu, right?
Mhm.
Her 1-person show, and I knew about her story because she wanted to do a documentary, so we talked about it, and then it developed into the stage show,
Mhm.
and I listened to some of the early stuff, and then when you got involved directing her, it transformed. I mean, your direction for her was amazing. And she was amazing too. But the collaboration was great. What's it like being a director?
I love it. I love it so much because, I grew up and my first years out of college thinking a director was the person who was like the leader of the process. It was their word or nobody else's. They were the ultimate creative say. And then I realized that I was working with a lot of directors who were not only like irresponsible, but also like often toxic and racist. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not the kind of director I want to work with. And then I was like, wait a minute, maybe I should just be the kind of director I want to work with. And I especially love working on new original work. I love working on autobiographical work, which is why Susan and I collaborated so well, I think.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I like to think of my position as a director, not one of leadership, but of one as active listening. I make it my priority to try to listen to the needs and desires of my collaborators and to manifest not only the answer to their needs and their desires and the support that they need to achieve their objectives, but also to try to share collaboratively my experience with making my work and to provide along the way constant affirmation that what they're doing is a good thing. And it doesn't often feel good. It can feel scary and traumatic. It can feel like you're doing the wrong thing, like you're not honoring your family. But if you're going to let fear stop you from moving forward in your process, then you're going to be stuck there. So I try to help people move through their fear so that they continue to learn and grow in their process.
What are you first? Do you consider yourself a storyteller first more than anything else?
Yeah, I would say a storyteller first.
Wow. So, okay. So you're going to New York.
Yeah.
Now, because you got a job to do there.
Yeah.
But on top of that, it's going to be an incredible source of material, right? The stuff that's going to happen. Because New York is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the most crazy places I've ever been. So what are you prepared for? What's your vision of what's going to go on?
Imminent fame.
Yes.
Why not?
Yeah. I haven't ever lived in New York, but I've worked there a couple times and I'm so glad because I actually have more friends there than I think I do. And I know that, being 32 and moving into the city in a way that's very invited. It's not like I'm 20, just graduated from college with no job waiting for me. So I'm walking in quite a bit of privilege with this entrance into New York. And I don't want to take that for granted and I don't want to waste it. So I would say that I'm really confident that the work that I make and the principles that I stand for are going to find a place in New York. I'm confident that that's going to happen. And I'm most excited about the collaborators and my peers and the community that I'm going to engage with because it's a brand new city. As you said, Matt, there's so much to see, so much to do, so many kinds of people. And I think that I have a really tough skin. I've had a lot of people be like, New Yorkers aren't nice. And I'm like, that's cool.
But that's not true.
I'm not worried about it.
In the creative community, New Yorkers are very friendly. They're very open to people because everybody comes from somewhere else. There is no New York freeze, right? I mean, what I found is people are really friendly and open.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited for the city, excited for my journey. And I'm raring to go. I leave here in less than a month. So
tell us about the role that you're going to be playing in the production.
Yeah. So the production is a Broadway revival. The title is 1776, very famous when it first came out, about the founding fathers and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I am playing a founding father. His name is Edward Rutledge. He's the delegate from South Carolina. And in my opinion, he has one of the best songs in the show, which is really why I chose him. Because I was like, I don't want to be John Adams. He's like always on stage. Ew, I don't want to do that. Who has the best song? And I was like, this guy. So I was able to choose my role for the show, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
You, in fact, didn't You didn't really have to audition for it, did you?
So here's the really cool story and the connection, and how I really got this gig. Another creative home for me is American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, on Harvard's campus. And I have done Dragon Lady and Dragon Mama there. They've commissioned Dragon Baby with the intention to produce all three in repertory. And their artistic director, Diane Paulus, saw me in Dragon Lady. And at intermission, she went up to her producers and she was like, "Where the fuck did you find this woman?" And her producers, my friends, Mark and Emma, I'd worked with them a couple times. They were like, "I know, isn't she amazing?" And Diane was like, "I need her in 1776." And Mark and Emma were like, "We know." So then I meet her at the end of the show. She's so lovely and so nice. And then the next day, I get an email from her assistant asking me to meet with Diane. And I sit down with Diane, and Diane says, "I'm directing 1776, the revival. It's going to be cast with all female, trans, non-binary identifying people, people of color, Indigenous Black folks. And I want to have an ensemble of strong performers, but also like incredibly intersectional and diverse people." And she looked at me and she was like, "I saw you in your show last night and I knew I had to have you in my play. Now the question is, who do you play?" And I was like, "Send me the script. Let me know what your concept is, and I'll email you tomorrow."
Wow. Okay.
So in many ways, Dragon Lady was my audition, and I aced it.
Right.
So,
Wow.
okay. So how in Broadway, what's the run like? I mean, so you get the gig, how long does it go?
Well, it's really different. So it really depends, right? It
Mhm.
depends on what kind of show it is, where it's going to be at. For example, if this was a brand new work, and I had a commercial producer behind it, and it isn't selling well, we could technically close after opening night. This isn't one of those.
Yes.
As an official revival, with a commercial producer and American Repertory Theater as the producing partner, we are performing at the Roundabout Theater, which is a calendared house, meaning we have a specific start and end date.
Oh, okay.
And then what happens after we finished our contract on Broadway is we have the national tour, which tours to about, I think, 11 to 13 cities. And that tour is from February 2023 until August 2023. And the tour actually ends here in Seattle at the Fifth Avenue Theater in August.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So yeah, that's the run. And I have contracts offered to me for both of those. And the question for me is whether or not I do the national tour, because if I have opportunities to produce Dragon Lady or any of the other plays from the Dragon Cycle in New York, or if ART wants to jump on producing all three and premiering Dragon Baby, of course I'd do that.
right. Yeah.
So what's next after this? You're going to be famous.
Yeah.
Everybody wants you.
Yeah.
Is there a film, a blockbuster film in the offing?
Well, there's actually a TV adaptation on the back burner.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Of the Dragon Cycle, or which one?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Nice.
Yeah, and we are actually working with my collaborator, Andrew Russell, who is also my director for the shows and a writing partner on the television series. We are working with Anita Gao and her production company, Kindred Spirits. They were the production company behind The Farewell for the international festivals. And she herself is a Chinese American woman based in LA with a really strong track record. And our script got into her hands, and she was so excited about the piece. And right now, that development has slowed down just because my theater track is taking off. But that's hopefully a couple years down the line, you'll be able to catch that.
So when does Broadway start for you?
It starts officially September of this year.
Okay.
So we actually open in Boston at ART first from May through July. I have some time off in August, and then we go to the Roundabout in September and begin our previews the second week of September, I believe.
All right.
Wow, yeah.
Well, I guess I'd have to make a trip to New York then.
Yes.
Yes. All right. I would
On the
love
road.
this. Yeah. Well, and what about Seattle? Always going to be home? Family coming back? Is that going to be hard to leave?
Well, yes, it will be, but it will always be home. I intend to be bi-coastal. I want my work to span the coasts, right? And I know that the next couple of years I'll find myself in LA, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Working on other things. I I have my original work, of course, which I want to elevate nationally and maybe even internationally. But as a writer, I want to find myself in writers' rooms working on other TV shows that aren't necessarily about my family. Right. I'd love to have a production company here in like 5 to 8 years that elevates specifically the voices of Black, Indigenous, POC creatives and narratives. That would be the ideal. I know that Seattle has a lot of potential here to be a filming city. A lot of people choose to go to Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
Or LA. So I'm interested to see how the creative landscape of Seattle changes over the next couple of years. And to see if there's a home for my production company here. So we'll see.
Well, maybe we recently had Bautran on to talk about, paper tigers, and so
it only took him 15 years to
yeah
get it done.
But the thing is that maybe you guys are the ones that are going to make it all happen. I would love to see that happen.
So has your family ever been to New York yet?
No, but I'm gonna fly.
Okay, that's
going
to be awesome.
Yeah,
that's got to be good material there.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited because I'm going to be housed. I'm being housed for my entire contract, which is
nice,
fantastic.
That's great.
And they're housing me in Manhattan, a short walk away from the theater. So to think that I'll be able to walk out of my apartment with like my grandma and my parents and my aunties and my uncles, and to hop on the subway to go up to Chinatown and Queens, to walk through Times Square, to have them see me on Broadway, it just feels so good. Like I'm more excited about my family being in New York, seeing me on Broadway, than I actually am about being on Broadway.
Wow.
The Porkalob posse on Broadway.
Yeah,
wow,
exactly.
That's going to be very cool. Before we close here, how about your grandmother and your mom? How are they feeling right now about all of this for you?
The fact is I am telling stories about people who are still very much alive, right? So it means that their stories, and yes, even their relationship, is constantly changing. What has been true since day one is that my family, including my mother and my grandmother, have been 110% supportive of me and my endeavors. That has never changed. That has been the consistent. Now, what their relationship is like is the thing that changes. It's been hard for me too, because my grandmother during this pandemic got very lonely. She lives on her own, and she really values her independence. So to not be able to even get on the bus to go to the store to grab her groceries, or to be an older Asian woman being harassed on the street during the first couple of years, the first year of the pandemic, that really did a number on her. And I think that she's developed a little bit of anxiety and depression, which has sparked really important conversations about mental health in our family. So for that, I'm grateful. And also for that, I'm scared for her, because she isn't getting any younger, right? My mother, a similar thing. The pandemic made isolating very hard for her. She's a very social person, another person who values her independence. She lost a lot of work as well. So they're supportive of me and my endeavors. And the reality is, for not only my family, but for so many of us right now, life is hard, and we're just dealing day to day as best as we can.
Well, keep making us laugh.
Yeah.
And feel things, because you have that talent, and it's just so enjoyable to watch you perform and to talk to you and to have these conversations.
Thanks so much for taking the time. We are honored.
Yeah.
Thank you both for having me.
And don't forget the Chino and Chicano after you make it really big. If we call you,
of course not.
Yeah. Sara Porkalob, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, y'all. Have a great day. Happy Friday.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.